Welcome, age of vintage society. Ginger Rogers had a pretty eventful life, both personally and professionally. Revered for her high-flying dance skills and seductive blue eyes, Ginger Rogers was a force to be reckoned with throughout the 20th century film scene. Ginger Rogers danced her way into the hearts of millions of Americans, becoming one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. How Ginger Rogers' life was dominated by Howard Hughes. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Ginger Rogers' affair with Howard Hughes was far from a storybook romance. Ginger Rogers was an American actress, dancer and singer who was best known for her on-screen partnership with Fred Astaire in a series of movie musicals throughout the 1930s. After a difficult childhood trying to make it as a child star with an overbearing mother, Rogers eventually became a Hollywood superstar, complete with scandalous relationships, an Academy Award, and behind-the-scenes drama. Ginger Rogers was born Virginia Catherine McMath, but a young cousin's failure to properly pronounce Virginia led to her being given the nickname Ginger, kind of fitting since her hair was naturally auburn. Her parents divorced when she was still an infant, and she was raised by her mother, Leela Owens McMath. Unbelievably, she experienced trauma within her first year of life. As a baby, Ginger was kidnapped by her father. Her parents were going through a nasty divorce, and she was caught in the middle. Thankfully, she was returned to her mother, whom she spent the majority of her time with. This proved essential. In 1920, Leela married John Rogers, and Ginger took his last name. She began her career, which was carefully orchestrated by her mother, performing in local shows in Texas while she was still a child. She then appeared with the Eddie Foy's vaudeville troupe before winning a Charleston contest at age 15. Her mother was a crucial part of her show business career, which she began as a young teenager. Ginger toured with a dance troupe called Ginger and the Redheads. That included her and 2 other dancers. That success ultimately led her to the Broadway stage in 1929, when she performed in Top Speed. She then went to Hollywood and began performing in movies, typecast as a flippant blonde. By the time she was 19, Ginger was starring in the Broadway musical Girl Crazy, for which she earned $1,000 a week. Her success would only continue from there, but the road ahead wasn't easy. Meanwhile, Ginger's mum consulted on her act and booked gigs for her daughter like a modern-day momager. When critics discussed how terrible Ginger's first acting gigs were, Mrs. Rogers worked with her daughter to improve. Rogers then signed a 7-year contract with Paramount in Astoria, Queens, making her feature film debut in 1929. In Hollywood, Rogers moved from flappers to gold diggers. She finally broke through in the Warner Brothers hit 42nd Street, showing her trademark broad with brains persona. Ginger Rogers didn't truly become a star until she partnered with Fred Astaire, making 9 pictures at RKO between 1933 and 1939. As Katharine Hepburn said, he gave her class, she gave him sex. Rogers' beauty and exceptional acting and comedic skills were the perfect complement to Astaire's magnificent dancing but not so great acting or looks. Their first film together was Flying Down to Rio, in which neither had a big part. By the time they did their famous cheek-to-cheek number in Top Hat, they were a hit. The duo would eventually star in 9 more Hollywood musicals together. In 1936, their peak year, they were 3rd in popularity after Shirley Temple and Clark Gable. Astaire, who always required a lot of rehearsal and even more takes, said Ginger Rogers was the only girl who never cried. When they started dancing, Rogers couldn't tap and had never danced with a partner. Nonetheless, even Astaire had to admit that no one else ever looked as right with him. Her gift was to make everyone long to dance with that funny-looking fellow. Astaire was once quoted as saying of Ginger, "Ginger had never danced with a partner before. She faked it an awful lot. She couldn't tap, and she couldn't do this and that, but Ginger had a style and talent and improved as she went along. She got so that after a while everyone else who danced with me looked wrong." While Ginger Rogers' partnership with Fred Astaire lifted them both to stardom, they also longed to prove themselves apart. Off-screen, Astaire was known for his relentless pursuit of perfection. He thought nothing of rehearsing a scene for days, and Rogers eventually tired of the gruelling schedule. Ultimately they went their separate ways in 1939, and Rogers went on to the individual recognition she had longed for. The following year she won an Oscar for her performance in Kitty Foyle. In 1945 she was the highest paid female actress in Hollywood. Her leading men apart from Astaire included Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda. Astaire had made a few major missteps and had retired from films in the mid-1940s until he was called in to replace an injured Gene Kelly in Easter Parade. When Judy Garland was forced to withdraw for health reasons from their next vehicle, the Barclays of Broadway, Ginger Rogers stepped in. Although the film was a hit, it was not enough to revive Rogers' flagging film career. Working with Fred wasn't always as easy as it seemed. Astaire was an avid perfectionist who would do anything to get the scene perfect. In one film they did 54 takes of the same dance on his insistence. Ginger left the set with blood in her heels. Most of the work they did was good, clean fun for the whole family, but the dancing king and queen actually used to dance to evade certain decency regulations from the era. One of their most famous scenes is now realised to be a subversion of the status quo. Fred and Ginger were constantly asked about their perceived romantic involvement. The performers always maintained they were just friends, and that outside of dancing they had nothing in common. As they were married to other people, their story was ironclad. Meanwhile, tabloids took an interest in her even off movie sets. As a strict Christian Scientist, she never drank or smoked. Her vice was more dairy-centred. In her home she always had a freezer full of ice cream. Besides her dance moves, her greatest claim to fame was her wardrobe. Ginger was always teased for the amount of clothes she would bring with her when she travelled. She defended herself by saying, "I believe in dressing for the occasion." She was married and divorced 5 times to dancer Jack Pepper, actor Lou Ayres, ex-Marine Jack Briggs, lawyer Jacques Bergerac, and director-producer William Marshall. 7 years after their first date, Howard Hughes was once again pursuing Ginger Rogers. He had first proposed to Rogers in the summer of 1936, after he had declared interest in Katharine Hepburn, but before their relationship began in earnest. Hepburn would later acknowledge that she had assumed Hughes was not completely faithful to her. "I didn't expect him to be chaste during our separations," she said, adding, "I was only slightly curious about his escapades." Rogers had separated from her second husband, Lou Ayres, but had not filed for divorce. Howard said that was just paperwork, that his lawyer could take care of that for her, and then she'd be free to marry Hughes. What do you say to that? With wounds still fresh from her last broken marriage, Rogers said she wasn't ready. According to Rogers, Hughes and she continued to date sporadically, but she wasn't exactly waiting by the phone. For the next 3+ years, Hughes would be involved with Hepburn and others, and Rogers had a full dance card as well. This first marriage proposal to Rogers came right after Rogers and her on-screen dance partner Fred Astaire finished shooting their masterpiece, Swing Time, directed by George Stevens and released in September 1936. Swing Time did what their previous films had done and more. Rogers and Stevens fell in love on the set of Swing Time and carried on a relationship for 3 years. 3 years that encompassed Hughes's romance with Hepburn and fell roughly into the midpoint of Stephen's 17-year marriage to former silent star Yvonne Howell. And then, in 1939, after his flight around the world and the fizzling of his affair with Betty Davis, Howard came back into Ginger's life with a vengeance. By early 1940 he had finally convinced her to allow his attorney, Neil McCarthy, to handle her divorce from heirs. Once the papers were filed, Rogers recalled, "Howard completely dominated my personal life. He sealed the deal by giving her a 5-carat emerald engagement ring." A woman who believed in the ritual of marriage and all it symbolised, Ginger continued to live with her mother Leela after accepting Howard's proposal. Hughes still had the mansion on Muirfield Road, and in 1940, in need of temporary lodgings during the Philadelphia story shoot, Hepburn moved back in, but they did not rekindle their romance. Hughes was working hard to convince Rogers, who had bested Hepburn in the Battle of the RKO Divas, that she was the woman he wanted to live with. One day he took her up to a parcel of land he had bought on Cahuenga Peak, overlooking Lake Hollywood. Hughes had purchased 138 acres west of the Hollywood sign, and he explained to Ginger that he was going to build a house there just for her. "He knew I loved a view," she recalled. "My own home had a lovely view, and this was much higher than the house I had, so he thought that would be very appealing to me, and to some extent it was." While Rogers was imagining life with Howard Hughes in a custom-built castle in the sky, her career was at a crossroads. Rogers had been RKO's top female star for much of the 1930s, but the studio had battled with her over contracts and struggled to figure out what to do with her in between Astaire musicals. The devoutly religious Rogers also had firm ideas about what she should be representing on screen, and she fought back against some of the material RKO tried to cast her in. It felt like Ginger Rogers' time was not her own. At first Howard would call Leela directly to schedule and plan his dates with Ginger. As they became more seriously involved, Hughes stopped asking either of the Rogers women for permission and started directly ordering Ginger to make sure he was the sole focus of her attention. She had begun to suspect that he was having her followed and that her phone calls were being surveyed. Years earlier, Hughes had kept tabs on Billy Dove by physically standing outside public restrooms to make sure he didn't lose her when she emerged. Ginger's instinct that he had tapped her phones, if accurate, would have been the first indication that Hughes had begun to outsource the activity of monitoring his girlfriends to a network of aides and spies. That network would become visible to all soon enough. By now Ginger was used to Hughes's patterns of manipulation, already aware that he was cheating. She wasn't going to let him gaslight her any more. She told him what she had found out about where he was spending his nights and with whom. Before the sedated cad could conjure up a response, Ginger produced the box full of jewellery, which included the emerald ring. The engagement, she told him, was over. Ginger Rogers and Hughes's on-again, off-again love affair lasted years. Soon, though, he demanded that Rogers be available for him whenever he desired. After Hughes blamed Rogers for a car accident she wasn't even in, she had refused to accompany him to a dental appointment, and he was so angry about this that he crashed his car, she finally broke it off. It was the only time anyone saw Howard Hughes cry. Howard wanted to get himself a wife, build her a house, and make her a prisoner in her own home, while he did what he pleased, Rogers later wrote. Thank heavens I escaped that. Ginger Rogers split her time between her 1,000-acre ranch near Medford, Oregon, and her Beverly Hills home. She was also an accomplished painter. She died on April 25, 1995, in Rancho Mirage, California, of congestive heart failure. Ginger Rogers made 73 films over a 50-year career, and she is truly a screen and dance legend. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about Ginger Rogers and Howard Hughes' affair? Howard controlled and manipulated all of her life.